I've seen this question asked quite a bit, and that is how to dynamically change a select menu based off of another select menu. So here, for example, when you're creating a new person in this form, when you select a new country, we want the state select menu to dynamically change and limit the states to whatever country was selected. So in order to do this, we need to use JavaScript. But the question is, should we use Ajax or not? So if we use Ajax, basically what will happen is when the user selects a country, a request will be sent to the server and the states for that country will be sent back. And we'll use JavaScript to update this list with that information. If we want to keep it all client-side, we'll get a much better response rate. So the user interface will be more responsive. And so that's usually preferred if we don't have a ton of states. In this case, I expect to just have a few hundred states or so. So keeping it all client-side is preferred without using Ajax. So in order to do that, we need to somehow dynamically generate a JavaScript file with the list of states and which country goes with what state and so on. So to do that, I'm going to create a new controller here. I'm going to call it JavaScripts. The reason I'm calling it JavaScripts is Rails already has a folder called JavaScripts, and by having a controller with that same name, will basically allow us to have dynamic generated JavaScripts in the same location. Because if the file isn't found, it'll just pass it on into the controller. So let's go to that new controller. And in here, we'll create a new action. Let's call it dynamic states. Let's fetch all the states. And in the view is important because we need to dynamically generate JavaScript. So how do we do that? Well, in Rails 2, remember, the first part of the extension is the MIME type, or the type of file the user is requesting. So in this case, .js is fine. And the second part is the template we're going to use. So I want to use ERB here because that's nice and flexible. We could use RJS or pretty much anything else. Let's fetch that file again. And in here we can put any JavaScript with ERB tags and whatever else we want. So because it's quite a bit of JavaScript, I'm going to cheat a little bit and just drag a file in here. Let me change the language so it's more legible. Okay, so what this JavaScript is doing is basically it gets a new states array, and then it's looping through all the states we've fetched in our controller, and for each of those it's adding the state from Ruby into the JavaScript array. So basically giving JavaScript access to all of our states, and that includes the country ID and so on. And then in this country selected function, we are fetching the country that's selected, and then we're limiting the states options menu to just one, which is basically removing all the options in the state select menu. And then for each of the states, we're finding all the states which match that country's ID, and then we're basically adding that state back into our select menu here. And then we're either showing or hiding that state select menu based on whether or not it has any values. And then down here, when the DOM is loaded, we hide our state field because we want it only visible when the country is selected. And then the country ID, when that's, or the country select menu, when that gets changed, we want to trigger that function up here. So that's basically what this JavaScript is doing. So let's try it out. Let's just look at that JavaScript file in here. Our dynamic states. And I probably named it wrong. Did I name it dynamic? Oh, you know what? I need to add that JS extension. That's important. Okay. Dynamicstates.js. Alright, this is what it looks like. So you can see that all those states were generated based off of the ERB we had in there. Okay, that looks good. Now it's important to make sure your routes are set up so that that new action can be found. So just make sure that this line is in there somewhere, controller action.format, and that way the JavaScript's.js files will be found in the JavaScript's controller back here. Okay, So let's switch this back to HTML language, and okay, this is back in our new person template, and what we need to do is somehow include this JavaScript file into here. Well, what I like to do for that is I have a helper method set up called JavaScript, and I just give the name of the JavaScript file. So what this does is, if we look at our application helper, this helper method that I made uses content4 to add the JavaScript include tags that includes the files which were listed into this head content4. And that way, in my application layout, I just yield that content back into the layout. So that way, I'm able to dynamically determine what JavaScript files get loaded in each template. And notice I'm doing the same thing for style sheets if you want to do that. So it's a pretty handy way. I like that approach for inserting JavaScript or CSS files dynamically depending on what template gets loaded. Okay, so let's go back here and reload this back here. There we go. And notice our states menu disappeared, and if we look at our source, you can see that we have our dynamic states JavaScript file loaded. And now when we select a state, our state menu appears and is properly only displays the states for that country. So that's how you can keep everything all client-side and dynamically alter the state of a select menu using JavaScript. This episode is sponsored by Peepcode. Please visit peepcode.com and check out their latest screencasts on Ruby on Rails.